So Africa's richest man had a choice. Tanzania was on the table, but Dangote turned towards Kenya. And if this refinery actually gets built, it could reshape fuel, trade, logistics, and political influence across East Africa. Hello and how are you? Welcome to Africa Profit Stories. My name is Tino Chauke. Rich was reported on 7 July 2026 that Dangote Group plans a proposed 700,000 barrel per day refinery in Lamu, Kenya, financed with internal cash flow, bonds, and possible IPO. That would make it the biggest refined project in East Africa. So the question is simple. Why Kenya? What did Kenya offer that Tanzania could not offer? First, here is what happened. Aliko Dangote is the Nigerian billionaire behind the massive Dangote refinery, which is in Lagos. After months of interest in an East African mega refinery, Rituals says the company has now selected Lamu as the Kenyan site. With soil tests underway, the engineering work has already started. This is not just another factory announcement. At 700,000 barrels per day, this would be a regional energy hub, not a normal industrial plant. And because East Africa's fuel system is so interconnected, this is not simply a Kenyan business story. It is an East African geopolitical story. To understand why this matters, you have to understand East Africa's fuel problem. Rituals reported in April that the region currently imports its refined petroleum products, mainly from the Middle East. That makes East African countries vulnerable to shipping disruptions, conflicts, and price shocks. We saw what happened again in 2026 when the Middle East crisis pushed up imports cost and Kenya's fuel price jumped sharply. Africa Regional Energy Analysis says Eastern Africa consumes about 416,000 barrels per day of refined petroleum products, but current regional production covers only 5% of that demand. In other words, the region buys fuel from outside because it does not refine enough inside. So this is the gap that Dangote is currently trying to attack. So why does Kenya look attractive from a location and infrastructure perspective? Let's start with Lamu. It sits on the Indian Ocean and forms the anchor of the Lapsset Corridor, Kenya's planned second major transport corridor. Kenya Ports Authority says Lamu was built at a site with a natural depth of 18 meters and it can handle Panamax and post-Panamax vessels, and they plan to grow it into a 23-berth port. KPA says that the corridor links Lamu inland towards Ethiopia and South Sudan. Well, of course, that matters. Why? Because a refinery this size is not only about local consumption, it is about crude coming in effectively, refined product moving out effectively, and again it presents the ability to scale. Dangote is not looking at Kenya as a country of one market. He is looking at Kenya as a door into a region. Now look at the regional market. Ritual says the refinery is intended to supply Kenya and neighboring countries, which is where the real commercial logic kicks in. Kenya is already tied into a regional fuel distribution. Kenya's pipeline company says it handles about 90% of petroleum product destined for Uganda. Now, Ritual has also reported that Rwanda has signed new agreements to move more fuel through the Mombasa route using the Kenyan storage and pipeline infrastructure. Official East African Corridor Police links Kenya to Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, and DRC, while Lapsset is designed to open links towards South Sudan and Ethiopia. So the possible commercial reach here now includes Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, Eastern DRC, and potentially some nearby markets. So those are potential markets. Of course, not guaranteed customers, but that reach is exactly what makes Kenya commercially powerful. So the question is here, why did Tanzania miss out on this opportunity? Now to answer it, there's no straight answer. We have to answer it in a manner that doesn't offend anyone. Like we have to pretend like we're walking on top of eggshells, because this is so fragile. Of course, Tanga was a serious option, but Kenya offered a stronger infrastructure and market proposition for this specific refinery now. So Rituals reported in April that East African leaders were discussing a refinery at Tanga. So Tanzania was clearly in the conversation. And Tanzania Ports Authority shows that Tanga is not a weak port. It has 13 meters of depth, 2 berths, an oil jetty, and a crude terminal under construction. But if you compare the official number, Lamu looks like a more expandable deepwater platform, while Kenya also brings a large number of domestic economy, and a stronger existing regional fuel distribution system. Investors do not reward countries simply because they have land. They reward ecosystems. But again, this does not mean the plan is perfect. This could still go wrong. Who knows? A refinery of this size would require a staggering capital. Now, according to Rituals, Lagos refinery ended up costing more than 20 billion, far above its original estimate. After all those engineering problems, site changes, and the pandemic, inflation, and currency weakness, so execution risk is very real. Then there is also oil price volatility, political risk, and the question of feedstock. Africa says that in Eastern Africa, only South Sudan and Sudan are currently producing crude oil, and Rituals has not yet reported or even confirmed the crude oil supply plan for Lamu. This means East Africa could end up importing crude oil and refining it locally, who knows, which still improves industrial value but does not eliminate exposure to global markets. And over the long term, every fossil fuel mega project also faces energy transition risk. If the project succeeds, the implications for East Africa could be huge. It could reduce dependence on imported refined products. It could trigger more spending on storage, transport, pipelines, and port logistics, and strengthen Kenya's role in regional energy trade. It could also reshape competition from existing fuel suppliers that currently serve East Africa from outside the region. But one thing we cannot promise is cheaper fuel. Of course, it's possible, but just not now. Cheaper fuel is possible only if the economics work. For instance, Kenya's EPRA pricing formula makes it clear that pump prices still depend on landed cost, taxes, distribution cost, and regulated pricing components. So this story is less about instant cheap petrol and more about supply, security, industrial capacity, and strategic leverage. So what is the biggest lesson here? The biggest lesson is not that Kenya is somehow better than Tanzania in every respect. The bigger lesson is that mega investments follow infrastructure, logistics, and market access. Well, according to a report, so Rituals reporting points exactly to those reasons. So Kenya won this round because Dangote seems to see it as the strongest platform for reaching a hungry regional fuel market from a large-scale coastal corridor. In the end, this is not just about where a refinery sits. It is about which country looked most like the gateway to East Africa's energy future. So in conclusion, we'll just say Dangote chose Kenya, not just because of Kenya itself, but because Kenya offered the best combination of corridors, existing fuel infrastructure, and with that, thank you.